Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching third part of What If Naruto Became Dual Half Breed. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Rayne walked into the Cage's room and placed Naruto in the bed before sighing for the umpteenth time. She looked at him pityingly before hearing a crackle on her headset. She picked it up to find out who it was and sighed softly as she heard Itachi's voice. "Rayne, where have you gone? You should not have taken this long to arrive. Gobi is a pain in the dollar for everyone except Naruto to deal with, but still." Rayne sighed again as she walked out of the room, speaking softly into her headphones so as not to wake Naruto. "We encountered complications. We had all forgotten that last night was Naruto's transformation." She could clearly hear Itachi swearing loudly on the other end of the line. Her lips twitched slightly at the words he was using, but she couldn't laugh because of the circumstances. Itachi responded with worry in his voice after a full minute of swearing. "Is everyone all right?" Rayne sighed lightly again as she slumped against the wall, exhausted from the day and having to explain this multiple times. She wished everyone was in the same place when things like this happened. So, to state the obvious, he went ballistic. He destroyed Akasuna no Sasori with surprising ease during his rampage. He then went after Nibi and Deidara, one of our spies in Akatsuki. Naruto was draining Nibi when Gobi and I arrived, and Deidara had his arm severed and two large holes in his chest from where Naruto's wings pierced him. Naruto has third-degree burns from Nibi's darkness flames and has lost all of his Yuki and Banpai Ryoku. The only bright spot in all of this is that Naruto regained control of himself after I knocked him off of Nibi. As Itachi swore loudly on his end, she had to cover her ear. She was muttering lightly and hadn't realized Itachi had spoken up again. "Is she okay?" Rayne closed her eyes because she didn't want to say anything, but she couldn't because of what had happened. "No. Nibi will never be the same physically as she was before this night. She is no longer the Biju's fourth strongest as of right now. If she recovers, I would rank her as slightly weaker than Shichibi but still capable of pounding Shukaku. However, this is contingent on her complete recovery. If not, I dare to say she will never fight again." Rayne began to wonder what was going on after a brief pause when Itachi responded in a confused tone. How is this even possible? Her abilities shouldn't be diminished so drastically as a result of her blood being drained. Rayne sighed in annoyance because he hadn't done any research on vampires after Naruto's first transformation. Naruto doesn't just drain blood in that form, Itachi. He also drains the soul essence. Nibi would have been bound to Naruto for the rest of their lives if I hadn't knocked him off a few seconds later. He had drained that much of her soul along with her blood. She was about to ask what was the hold-up, irritated by the pregnant pause, when Itachi spoke up. "They've arrived. I'll pitch in where I can." His communicator cut him off right there, most likely because he had rushed over to assist Nibi. Rayne sighed once more as she pushed herself away from the wall and stretched out a little. She shrugged as she yawned and made her way to the other spare room that had been pointed out to her. She sighed slightly as she entered the room and quickly closed the curtain before the sun could burn her. Looking around the room, she noticed some nightwear, most likely left out by Bufu or his girl, and sighed as she picked it up and stripped off her clothes before slipping into them. Her thoughts wandered as she lay in bed, looking up at the ceiling, and she didn't think about the day. "When I get home, the first thing I do is take a blood shower. Though I'm sure Kyuubi will be irritated that he has to clean up the shower again. I don't understand why he's upset. It's not like he's never used it before, and I swear he uses it more than I do." Itachi jumped over the railing as Gobi walked in with Nibi on her back as soon as his head set off. He landed gracefully and rushed over to her, inspecting Nibi's wounds to determine what had happened. Kyuubi burst into the room not even a second after he started looking over her, sensing Nibi's distress and having a slight worry written on his face. Gobi rolled her eyes at the two as they examined Nibi's wounds. She laid down on the couch and turned towards them, avoiding an attack out of sheer annoyance. You should not be concerned about her wounds. They will heal in due course. What concerns me is the damage to her soul. It can only be healed by a divine being. Kyuubi cringed as he discovered the bite mark on her collarbone where Naruto had bit her. Itachi saw and heard this as well, and based on what Rayne told him, he picked her up gingerly and slowly made his way to her room so she could rest. Gobi turned to face Kyuubi with a sneer once he was out of the room. Kyuubi raised an eyebrow at this, unsure what he had done. When Gobi saw this, she growled at him, trying not to attack him. I understand why Rayne forgot about Naruto's transformation because she isn't as familiar with demons as we are, but you should have remembered. I can't say you're entirely to blame for Nibi's condition, but you bear some of the blame. Kurahana would be disappointed that you contributed to her sister's disability. Kyuubi's face dropped when he realized it was true. He didn't want to admit it, but it bothered him. Turning away from him, Gobi began to walk away when she was cut off by a girl with long green hair and a confused expression walking into the room. Yanbi looked around the room, unsure of where she was. She had no idea what had happened. Hikaru was hugging her one moment and then she appeared. It didn't help that she couldn't feel him nearby. Looking around nervously, her gaze was drawn to two familiar faces. She squeaked in terror before leaping behind the nearest object, which happened to be a couch. When Kyuubi and Gobi saw this, their sweat dropped. Dear Kami, she still hasn't changed. Was Kyuubi's only thought as Gobi blinked in surprise at the scene before turning into a scowl. Oh no, the pitiful one has arrived as well. This is a huge improvement. Gobi spoke sarcastically at the end, already wishing she hadn't agreed to come here with Rayne. Yanbi simply curled up on the couch, hoping to blend in and avoid getting on Gobi's nerves. Kyuubi growled at Gobi, unconsciously filling the room with his murderous intent. What exactly is your issue? Gobi glared at him, her eyes filled with contempt, before turning around and walking away without responding. Kyuubi growled in the back of his throat, but tried to calm down when he noticed Yanbi shivering from the killing intent he was spewing. He sighed deeply as he noticed Itachi walk into the room, perplexed. What was the deal with all this murderous intent coming from over here? I mean, I swear you were once again attempting to intimidate Rayne, which was hilarious as hell, but that's beside the point. Kyuubi developed a tick mark on his forehead before sighing in resignation, knowing that fighting wouldn't get him anywhere. It's just an old feud between Gobi and me, nothing to worry about. And Yanbi, please come out. Nobody here will ever hurt you. The said Biju's head poked out from behind the couch before squeaking even louder than before as she noticed Itachi and ducked back behind the couch. Itachi and Kyuubi both broke out in cold sweat at her shyness. Itachi turned to face Kyuubi, who was shaking his head in disbelief at the scene. Please tell me she isn't always this way. Kyuubi sunk his head in response. Itachi sighs as he walks up to the couch, repressing another drop of sweat. Motioning for Kyuubi to assist him, he walked behind it, scaring Yanbi as she tried to crawl away, only to find Kyuubi in her way. Kyuubi sighed as she rushed to the couch, knowing it was her only hope of survival. Will you give up your attempt to flee? You are secure in this location. Itachi, on the other hand, has something to say to you. Itachi blinked in confusion, trying to figure out how Kyuubi knew that. He noticed him pointing at his nose and realized he could tell he had something to say. Shaking his head, he approached a still terrified Yanbi, hoping she wouldn't freak out on them. The said Biju blinked in confusion, not understanding what they were talking about, and wished Hikaru was there so she didn't have to be as scared as she was. Sighing again, Itachi squatted beside her and looked her in the eyes before speaking. I understand how difficult this is for you, but after you passed out from... He never did tell me his name. Yanbi looked at Itachi, recognized who he was talking about, and responded gently, not knowing what he was trying to say. Hikaru. Hikaru is his name. Itachi nodded in agreement before sighing lightly and returning her gaze. Thank you very much.
Hikaru asked me to do 2 things after you passed out.
The first was to look after you. He asked this question because during his battle with Kisame, he opened the Shimon Gate. Her eyes widened as her worst nightmare of the last few decades came true. Tears streamed down her cheeks as her body shuddered violently. Itachi grabbed her shoulders and tried to calm her down, but it only forced her to strike Itachi's face with one of her tails, sending him through the nearby wall, which was 5 feet of solid concrete mixed with steel and coated with titanium on the walls. Turned couldn't easily break through the walls if the sun cannons failed to pick them off. Kyuubi just stared at the new hole in the wall before returning his gaze to Yanbi and then back to Itachi as he climbed through the hole like Jiraiya after spying on Tsunade. Itachi gave Kyuubi a look that said, "Where the fuck did that come from?" As he noticed the glare, a drop of sweat formed on Kyuubi's brow. I have no earthly idea. I've never seen her like this before and, to be honest, I don't want to. He vanished and reappeared behind Yanbi, pinning her limbs down with his retractable tails as Itachi approached her again. She struggled against Kyuubi's grip on her, but she was unable to break free. After a few moments, her struggle came to a halt, and she looked down at the ground, crestfallen, with a new set of tears welling up. Itachi sighed deeply and placed his hand on her chin, lifting it up so she could see his eyes. Hikaru wanted me to tell you something else. Yanbi stared at him expectantly, which was unusual because she was normally very patient. Itachi sighed again and decided to say it, hoping Kyuubi could keep her down. He said he wanted you to know. He loved you, I said. Yanbi's shock at what Itachi said was relieved when he saw Kyuubi's tails. He never imagined Itachi saying those words, even if it was someone else and he was just the messenger. I mean, the young Uchiha barely showed any emotion to begin with, aside from his obvious love for Paki. Yanbi's eyes widened and she passed out with a sad smile on her face and a light blush as she muttered things neither of them wanted to hear. Itachi twitched his brows at the two before turning around and walking away, not wanting to know what they were thinking and not caring for the most part. He just wanted to get to his Paki stash because it had been a difficult day for everyone, and to ensure that he had enough for the week before having to go on another raid for his prized snack food. Rayne sighed as she rolled over on her bed. She couldn't sleep because she had a bad feeling in her stomach that wouldn't go away. Normally, she wouldn't pay attention to it because Naruto was fine. She was concerned about Nibi's condition, but that wasn't what was bothering her. It had something to do with Naruto, but not directly with him. She couldn't shake the feeling that Akira was in danger. She couldn't admit to herself that she was conflicted about the whole thing. Naruto really liked calling Rayne a mother. In her eyes, he was her child, and she treated him as she would her own. All of that changed when she learned from Jiraiya that Akira was still alive. She was furious at first, believing she had abandoned Naruto. She would have marched down and killed herself if Jiraiya hadn't told her what had happened to her. She was conflicted about what to do after hearing that. On the one hand, she wanted to remain Naruto's mother and not tell him about her, but she knew he'd find out and might never speak to her again because he could hold a grudge for a lifetime if necessary. On the other hand, to tell him and hope that he doesn't go straight to her and abandon her. Sure, she wouldn't be alone because Kyuubi was there, but he wasn't likely to stay long. She wasn't sure about Itachi because Akira was his sensei and he loved her as much as he loved Naruto. Rayne rolled around in her bed until she sat up and looked around the room. She stood up and quickly changed out of her nightgown and into her regular clothes after staring at the wall for a few minutes. She exited her room and went to Naruto's room once she was fully dressed. She was relieved that no one was in the hallway because she didn't want to explain what had happened any further than she already had. Rayne quietly slipped into Naruto's room after reaching it without running into anyone. He was still out cold from his healing wounds. She walked slowly over to the bed and sat beside Naruto's head. She lightly smiled as she placed her hand on his cheek, seeing him inhale deeply at her touch. She kept watching him as he breathed and his wounds healed slowly in front of her eyes, unable to take her gaze away from the slightly disgusting, yet intriguing sight. She was transfixed as she watched him recover. She had never seen anything like it before because she had never really looked at herself when she healed, so she guessed what it looked like for the most part, aside from it being slightly faster due to his demonic blood. The sight of his blood was a problem, as she had to resist the vampiric urge to sink her fangs into him and taste him. Even so, she was struggling because she hadn't had a good feeding in days. Sure, she drained that vamp 2 days ago, but that was just a snack in comparison to her strange feeding habits. Rayne looked down at Naruto and brushed his bangs off his forehead before leaning down and kissing his temple, shaking her head and calming her vampiric blood. She couldn't explain why she suddenly felt tired and her legs wobbled as she attempted to stand up. As she lay back down on the bed, she could only conclude that she hadn't gotten enough sleep in the last few days, and that, combined with her lack of feeding, she was exhausted. Looking down at Naruto, she decided he wouldn't mind if she lay down next to him and hugged him tightly before whispering in his ear. "My son, sleep well." Akira clenched her teeth as she used her kunai to deflect the sword strike. She wasn't in the best of shape as she parried another strike, this one knocking the kunai from her grasp. Her clothes were ragged, and her body was covered in cuts and gashes as she struggled to deal with the Uchiha's unreal reflexes. It was the first time in more than a decade that she felt this way. It was as if she were facing Minato again, but this time without the Hiraishin. She jumped out of Madara's range, pulled out a piece of paper, and in half a second transformed it into a paper shuriken. She threw it at him without hesitation before sealing it with a few quick seals. "Cage origami shuriken," says the narrator. The paper shuriken suddenly multiplied into 50 and flew at breakneck speeds towards Madara. Most people wouldn't take this jutsu seriously because it was only on paper, but Madara was not deceived. He had nothing to be concerned about and smirked behind his mask as he prepared to demonstrate his dominance over her. The shuriken ripped through his body as if he were made of paper, but Madara just smiled at Akira, making her wary. Her eyes widened as she noticed his body healing at an accelerated rate, faster than she had ever seen before. Though she was aware that her son had a faster regeneration rate, it made little difference at the time. Madara began to laugh as he noticed Akira's stunned expression before sprinting over to her and thrusting his sword into her heart. Only her sparring sessions with Minato saved her life, as she moved just enough to the right that the blade only pierced her shoulder and not her heart. She gritted her teeth in pain as she kicked him in the stomach to get him to leave, but he seemed unaffected. His grin widened behind his mask as he twisted his sword and pulled it out. Akira couldn't help but exclaim in surprise and pain as he dislocated her shoulder before kicking her in the gut and launching her into the wall. On impact, a massive crater was formed, which was eerily similar to something Tsunade could have done. Akira tried to force her body to move, but all she did was cough up blood. She pried herself away from the wall, gritting her teeth and looking out her half-lidded eyes. Even with her eyes half closed, she noticed him approaching her and barely rolled out of the way of another sword thrust into her heart, only for it to pass through her left kidney. She gritted her teeth and screamed, but it was in vain because the sword was pushed all the way through before being violently twisted and ripped out, leaving a large hole in her stomach. He watched in amusement as she writhed and squirmed in pain as she gasped and silently screamed. He grew tired of her after a moment and kicked her in the gut, slamming her back into the wall and pinning her with a few kunais to ensure she couldn't dodge his strike this time. Before speaking, Madara smirked at her and leveled his blade at her heart. "Akira, I'd like to know why you betrayed us. Yes, I am aware that your son is a Jinchuriki, but none of them are human. They're just reflections of the creature within. You'd know if you spent time with one like I did." As she heard all of this, Akira's eyes narrowed. Madara's smirk broadened as he began to laugh at her. "Yes, I knew who you were from the beginning, but I just assumed you wanted to kill him because the creature responsible for your husband's death was inside him." Akira glared at Madara with no visible emotion other than hatred as she stared fearlessly into his four-pronged Mangekyo Sharingan. "Even though he is a dhampir and a Hanyu, Naruto is more human than you will ever be. My role as his mother is complete as long as he lives. And, by the grace of Kami, you will not touch him even when I am gone." Madara's eyes widened in surprise as he heard her response and was about to plunge his blade into her and finish her off.
Akira vanished in an instant, transformed into dozens of origami butterflies, leaving him slightly stunned.
He narrowed his eyes as he searched for her, quickly getting over his inability to see her move. But he couldn't because he couldn't find any trace of her chakra. He clenched his teeth and dashed outside to find her, not wanting her to reveal any more information. Deidara winced as he narrowly avoided being burned by a large fireball that seared some of his hair. He continued running through the forest, oblivious to the fact that it had begun to rain heavily. His eyes widened as he tried to figure out why, just as he was forced to dodge a large shark missile. He gritted his teeth and stuffed his hands into his pouch, seeing no way out. "I apologize, Akira, but this must be done." He knew he had no chance of escaping them, so he knew this was the only way. In fact, he knew they could each be him on their own, but all of them together was overkill. He was initially recruited by Fugoku, who easily defeated him, prompting Deidara to vow that one day he would find a way around his forsaken eyes. He initially declined the offer, stating that he would rather die than work for people who wanted to take over the world, but after speaking with Konan and learning her real name was Akira, she persuaded him to assist her in sabotaging their plans. So he agreed, only because he did not want the world to be ruled by a single ruler. Zetsu was not someone he was confident he could defeat. He didn't know much about him other than his split sides and ability to control plants. He was pretty sure he could win based on what he demonstrated, but the way the others treated him gave the impression that he was superior to them, so he didn't want to put that theory to the test. He was confident that if he was at full health and could keep the shark-like man away from him, he could easily defeat Kisame. But since he was in poor health and fighting all three of them would be a suicide mission, he might as well go kamikaze on the bastards and level the fucking base while he was at it. He scooped up as much clay as he could and placed it in the giant mouth on his chest before covering it back up with his cloak as it chewed as fast as it could, only thinking of Akira's safety and future. Deidara ducked beneath the Samahata swing, which was aimed at severing him from the waist, and kicked Kisame in the stomach before being hit by a large root, a curiosity of Zetsu's plant control. He clenched his teeth and looked around, realizing he was surrounded by Fugoku, Kisame, and Zetsu. Gritting his teeth as he noticed Madara and Pain weren't among them, he could only hope she was okay and could get away from the impending blast. His eyes burned hotly as he thought of her and he smirked uncontrollably, knowing this was his final performance of his art. But for the time being, all he could do was wait until the clay was ready and hope that it would kill at least one of them, if not all of them. While he was thinking this, he heard another voice from behind him, and his grin widened slightly as he realized she only had to deal with Madara. The thought bothered him, but he was confident she wouldn't try her luck against him. Pain approached him as Zetsu, Kisame, and Fugoku surrounded him, leaving him with little chance of escape, not that he intended to. So you and Conan were spies from the beginning. Actually, I'm surprised it's you too. I mean, you're protecting the son of the Yondaime Hokage, the one who, along with the Uchihas, helped destroy your clan. Deidara narrowed his eyes, knowing it was true, but he couldn't hold it against the man. That could be true, but at the very least, he spared anyone who surrendered. The Uchihas just killed us for the hell of it. And, besides, whatever Conan-chan requests, I will gladly do it for her, even if it means risking my life. As Deidara continued, the other's eyes narrowed, and Pain wondered if he should have left. Actually, since she's most likely long gone from here now that we've found her, I should tell you that's not her real name. Namikaze Akira, wife of the Arashi and mother of the former vessel of the Nine-Tailed Fox, has been released from its 5-year prison. Their eyes narrowed as Fugoku cursed lightly for not recognizing her, and Deidara smirked as the clay in his chest neared completion. Pain took a step forward, his gaze questioningly fixed on Deidara. That's not possible. The only way to open the Biju is for the vessel to perish. As he heard this, Deidara's grin widened and he had to point it out to them. Not unless the Biju transform their vessel into a Hanyu. The seal breaks and they are freed once the vessel is transformed into one. The reason they don't do this in the first place to gain freedom is that most of them despise their vessel. Kind of like how Kyuubi despises you, Pain. Pain's eyes narrowed as he heard this, while the others looked perplexed. Deidara smirked as he turned to face Fugoku, smirking viciously as he planned to create tension between them before blowing them to smithereens. Did you know it was him who caused Kyuubi to attack Konoha and wipe out half of the Uchiha clan in one night, all because he wanted his only 2 threats to be dealt with? That includes both your clan and the Yondaime. Fugoku's eyes narrowed as he frowned and turned to Pain as his Sharingan spun wildly. He may have killed off most of his clan, but he'll be damned if someone else tries and succeeds. When Pain spoke up, his eyes morphed into the Mangekyu and he closed his left eye as he was about to use Amaterasu. Yes, I did send him there, but it was at Madara's request. So, if you have to deal with anyone, it should be him, not me. The former Uchiha clan head narrowed his eyes but nodded as he returned to a still smirking Deidara and was about to finish him off when Deidara began glowing a brilliant white. I'm truly sorry, Akira, but at least you'll have more time with your son. But I never intended to be with you because I wasn't going to let these fucks live for murdering my Imouto. So I'm hoping you'll forgive me. Yes, this is retaliation. Everything is going boom right now. Katsu. Akira lay on top of a paper bird floating above the storm clouds, bleeding heavily as she looked down towards the ground, only to see a bright flash of light before a large mushroom cloud enveloped the area. When she saw this, her clouded eyes widened and she managed to push herself up on her knees before screaming. Deidara. As she watched Naruto walk solemnly towards the mansion, Rayne sighed. She could tell he was thinking about what happened the night before. He was completely stunned. She sighed again as she watched him, before shifting a little to get more comfortable as Gaara shifted a little over her shoulder. This wasn't the first time it had happened, but it was the first time he had actually harmed and nearly killed someone as a result of the transformation. And the fact that he was pushing her away didn't help matters. As Naruto and Rayne entered the mansion, they noticed a green-haired girl sitting peacefully on the couch. Until she noticed them. Yanbi screamed and jumped behind the couch, shaking uncontrollably in fear, because she hadn't seen Rayne since they were created, and she'd never seen Naruto before, and his aura was terrifying. This did nothing to improve Naruto's mood. He winced at the sight before looking down and quickly ascending the stairs, leaving behind a slightly irritated Rayne and a terrified Yanbi. He noticed Yugito running towards him with a small smile on her face as he reached the top of the stairs and turned to his room. "Hello, Naruto. What's the problem?" As she approached him, she could tell something was bothering him. He was paler than usual, his eyes had lost their usual radiance and were completely dull, and he trembled slightly. He shook her head and walked past her without even looking her in the eyes. "I'm not going to talk about it." She turned around, surprised at his retreating back, and rushed towards him, leaping in front of him, placing a hand on his shoulder and looking him in the eyes. "Naruto, what's the problem? You know it's better to discuss." Oof. As Naruto removed his fist from her stomach, the air left her lungs, and he turned around and walked into his room. She gasped for air and collapsed to her knees, surprised by his door. She could tell he was nice from her brief interactions with him before and at the diner table. But what made him hit her? She shook her head and slowly picked herself up, attempting to open his door to figure out what was wrong because something wasn't right with him. Of course, the door was locked, leaving Yugito irritated because she had half a mind to ram the door and break in. She was about to slam into it when she remembered that the doors had special properties that she couldn't break down. She sighed and moved her gaze away from the door. "I'm curious what's wrong with him. He's not feeling well? Maybe the others will figure it out." Yugito sighed and shook her head as she walked down the stairs to find out what was wrong with Naruto. Gobi stepped out of the shadows, a contemptuous expression on her face. She had moved on from her rage over what had happened to Nibi and her hatred for Kyuubi, but when she felt Naruto's presence, she realized something was wrong. But something about the Hanyu girl turned her off. It wasn't so much that she had an evil aura around her or an evil look in her eyes as it was that she, Gobi, felt threatened by her. She didn't know why. She was stronger than the Neko Hanyu in every way, despite being only a kitten in age. She doubted anyone in this house could defeat her other than Rayne, Kyuubi, and Naruto in his vampiric form. Then there was the fact that, in her opinion, she was more intelligent and beautiful than young Neko, but she still felt threatened by him. She threatened to take Naruto as her own. That frightened her. Gobi desired the dual half-breed more than anything else. Something about him made her feel. She couldn't explain it and wouldn't try. She shook her head and walked up to his room, looking at his door before sighing, knowing that this had to be done. Otherwise, he'd be stuck in this funk indefinitely. Add to that the fact that the others would simply leave him alone until he did it on his own. The door slammed open with a shift kick, and she entered the room gracefully. A certain cat Hanyu snuck her way towards the room from her hiding spot on the stairs to listen in on what was going on. Naruto was currently disgusted and saddened by his clawed hands. Even though it was his dark side, he couldn't believe he'd done it. All of the memories from the previous night had returned to him after he awoke, as if he had done it. And it made him sick. Yes, he could kill and leave people in worse conditions than before, but he never killed without remorse or attacked his allies and potential friends. Worst of all, he seemed to enjoy it. He was aware that it wasn't him, but it was. His dark side was a part of him, no matter how much he denied it. The thought made him shiver, but he knew it was true. When he looked in the mirror, he could see his dark side laughing at him. With a quick slash, his mirror was shattered into millions of pieces and rained down on him. He stood motionless as the shards of glass cut through him, not caring that he would heal before anyone noticed. Do I genuinely like him? Am I a monster like him? As he laughed bitterly, his eyes gradually began to turn golden. Perhaps so. Perhaps the pitiful village was correct. I could be the demon they've been calling me all along. Perhaps I am the animal I have evolved into. A loud crash jolted him back to reality as an old face he recognized walked into the room. Gobi narrowed her eyes as she entered the room, catching the scent of blood. She turned to see Naruto with cuts all over his body and glass shards all over the floor. Her eyes widened in surprise as she noticed the golden glow emanating from his eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. Naruto simply stared at her as she did the same before laughing bitterly at her. "Oh. So you've arrived. First it was Ka-san, then Yugito, and now you. How many times do I have to say that I don't want to discuss it?" Gobi remained as passive as ever, but you could tell she was worried, even if she hid it exceptionally well. She remained silent and let Naruto rant on. "Why is it that whenever I have a problem, everyone comes to help me? Can't I just be left alone to solve my own problems? I'm young, but I'm not a child. With everything I've been through in my life, I've been forced to mature, but everyone still treats me like I'm a child." She just stood there listening to his complaints without even flinching. When Gobi responded, Naruto panted as he tried to catch his breath after screaming at her. "Are you done yet?" Naruto's eyes widen as she moves suddenly and grabs his neck, pinning him to the wall. He struggled for a few seconds but realized it was futile. Gobi took a deep breath and glared at him. "I'm not sure where you are or why you're acting this way, but let's get a few things straight. You are a child, no matter how mature you are. Everyone is trying to help you because you are young and brash, whereas we are much older and wiser. We know what we're talking about, as much as you don't want to admit it. We also let you solve your own problems. But you always drag us into it in this way. You understand why? Because you have no idea how to deal with it." Naruto growled at her and struggled even harder to break free, but Gobi easily clung to him. She suddenly gave him a light smile. "And that's fine. Even if you refuse to believe it, you are still a child. You will make errors and learn from them. That is understandable. Yes, we will eventually leave you to your own devices. But that won't be for a long time. You understand why?" When she spoke softly, Naruto just looked at her, puzzled. "It's because we care about you, even if some of us don't always show it." Naruto's eyes widen in recognition before he nods lightly as the golden hues in his eyes fade away. Gobi slowly lowered him to the ground, releasing her grip on his neck. What was the point of this? Naruto sighed and rubbed his throat. Nothing. She narrowed her eyes at him and was about to slam him against the wall when he continued. As you stated, I am a child who cannot handle everything that is thrown at me. But this is my issue. Nobody else's. Only I can figure it out. Gobi's pupils dilate before narrowing. She despised the fact that he used her own words against her. She shook her head before continuing. You'll never know unless you ask. There could be others who have gone through the same thing. I have my doubts. The issue is with who I am. Naruto cut her off. Gobi's eyes widened before narrowing in response. And what would be the problem with that? Naruto gave her a shrug before turning away and looking out the window. After a few moments of silence, Gobi was about to ask him again before using her standard method to get him to speak when he answered. I have two of me. One is bright, the other is dark. And we're at odds with one another. Hearing this, Gobi's already pale face lost a little bit of color. Was there two of him? Now that she thought about it, it made sense. The transformation of his personality into a full-fledged vampire was proof of this. As she was thinking about this, she heard a gasp from the doorway and turned around to see Yugito, the cat Hanyu, standing there. As he returned his gaze to the blonde-haired teen, Naruto shook his head and sighed. I was wondering when you were going to emerge from your hiding place. Gobi's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't even noticed her, despite the fact that she had apparently been there for quite some time, according to Naruto. This irritated her. Yugito approaches him and comes to a halt next to him. Could you please elaborate? That didn't make sense to me. Naruto sighed and nodded. To put it bluntly, I'm battling my dark side. If I win, I will be able to keep my body. If I lose, he takes over for good. However, if we kill the other, we die. So I'm in a catch-22 situation. Both of their eyes widen at this, though Gobi quickly hides hers. Naruto sighed and returned his gaze to the window. He's quiet right now, but he'll return and try again, and again, and again. He's never going to stop. I can only keep him away for the time being because I, like the majority of the people in this house, know nothing about sealing. Gobi nodded her head in agreement. Rayne and Kyuubi were both powerful and wise, but neither knew anything about seals. She wasn't particularly familiar with them, and she knew the Kitsune Hanyu, Nibi, and Yanbi wouldn't be either. Yugito sighed, sitting on the bed, unsure what to do. It seemed strange to her that she was even assisting. She'd only just met him and didn't know much about him other than what Kyuubi had told her. Nonetheless, she wanted to assist him for reasons she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was because he saved her from certain death and assisted her in surviving. Perhaps it was because he was a nice person and she knew he would help her if she was in trouble. Perhaps it was something more. She sighed and shook that thought away before approaching Naruto and placing a hand on his shoulder, smiling lightly. I know it's not much, but I'll be glad to assist. Naruto gave her a light smile before nodding. Thank you very much. That is all I can ask. Yugito nodded, her smile brightening at his comment. So, I must depart. Kyuubi is going to be upset because I'm already late. Naruto nodded as Yugito dashed away, hoping the great fox demon wouldn't be too upset about her 30-minute tardiness. Meanwhile, Gobi was gritting her teeth and resisting the urge to sever the Neko Hanyu with Tetsusaiga. Damn it, he was hers. She was about to say something when his eyes widened and he shot through the door using his super speed. Gobi just stood there, perplexed. What the? I'm not interested in knowing. Itachi had no idea why he had come here. So he was sitting next to the window, munching on his Pocky, in Nibi's room, sleeping peacefully, or as peacefully as she could after what had happened. As he gazed out the window, he sighed. He had absolutely no idea. Perhaps it was his demon side telling him, or perhaps it was just him being himself. Or it could be that everyone else was bothering him and Nibi wasn't, so he was here. Suddenly, movement in the bed jolted him out of his reverie. He turned around to see Nibi turning in her bed and her eyes slowly opening. As her gaze fixed on him, he swallowed the last of his Pocky. Unnerved by her glare, which clearly said, "What the fuck are you doing here?" He reached into his pouch for his stress reliever, another Pocky stick. Nibi's eyes twitched wildly at this, and she desperately wanted to jump him and start beating the hell out of him, but she couldn't move. For the time being, a glare will have to suffice. He ignored her stare and began chewing on his apple-flavored stick. How are you feeling? Nibi twitched even more as he took another bite of his favorite snack. How do you believe I feel? He shrugged, much to her chagrin, before she growled at him. You prick, I feel like shit. Itachi shrugged again as he continued to eat. That was the breaking point. She had tried her hardest to keep it under control, but her rage, combined with the fact that she had been in heat since she was released, was simply too much. She tried to lunge at him, but she couldn't get more than a foot off the bed before collapsing. Itachi, being the compassionate person that he was, caught her before she hit the ground. He quickly repositioned her in the bed while munching on his Pocky stick. Nibi clenched her teeth and nearly lunged at him again, but she restrained herself, not wanting to embarrass herself further. Itachi smirked at her as he put down his stick. "Oh, you'd like one." Nibi growled angrily at him, but her stomach had the same reaction, widening the Uchiha grin. Before glaring at the smirking Hanyu, she cursed her traitorous stomach. "Okay, good. I'm fucking starving. If you were me, you would be. I haven't eaten anything since I was released, and I've been trapped in that seal for 13 years. Stop fucking teasing me or I'll send your $1 to hell." So, what did he do? He grinned. When she got better, she was going to kill him. He pulled out another stick and handed it to her while she was thinking about how to end his life in the most gruesome ways possible. As he placed the Pocky in front of Nibi's face, she blinked in surprise. When she went to grab it, she half expected him to pull it away from her, but he didn't. She looked at him with interest. "Why?" He shrugged, pulling out another stick and munching on it. 1. You're starving. 2. It would be inhumane not to. And 3. I have an abundance of that flavor. Nibi twitched at his last reason, but he began eating it anyway. Itachi stood up and stretched after completing his. "So, since you're hungry, I'll go get you something to eat while you nibble on that. Do you have any preferences?" Nibi looked up at him, perplexed. "If there are any left, fish." The adolescent Uchiha nodded and exited the room to get her order. As she chewed on the raspberry-flavored stick, the Nekomata just blinked at what had happened. "I guess he's better than I thought he was. Oh well, I still despise him. He's a Kitune." Kyuubi sighed as he gazed down at Shukaku's Jinchuriki. "And what should I do with him? Shukaku, as I previously stated, will not listen to me. If you haven't heard, he is insane." Rayne shrugged her shoulders, as if she didn't care. "Determine that for yourself. He's your responsibility until Jiraiya returns because I don't want to deal with him right now." He growled menacingly at her. "You want me to look after him because you don't want to look after him." She closed her eyes for a moment before turning to face him and opening them. Kyuubi stopped growling when he noticed something strange about her eyes, primarily because she appeared troubled. "Something isn't quite right. Something is wrong with this situation, and I'm going to figure out what it is. I'm going to find Jiraiya and bring him here to repair Gaara's seal, but in the meantime, I need you to look after him. Plus, I have a strange feeling." The kitsune looked at her oddly, as if to elaborate. She sighed after taking a deep breath. "I've been deceiving Naruto the whole time." Kyuubi gave her a strange look. He examined her closely and detected the scent of salt water, indicating that she was crying. This perplexed him even more, and he planned to inquire about it. He didn't have to when she kept going. His mother has been alive the whole time. Kyuubi looked shocked when he heard this and looked at Rayne, who he could tell was in a lot of pain. And she never left him. She was forced to flee and has served as our spy in Akatsuki to protect him. And now she wants to see him more than anything. The kitsune understood Rayne's predicament at this point. She actually thought she was Naruto's mother after taking him in, but now. He sighed and placed his hand on her back to comfort her when he found himself on the ground and Rayne exiting the room. Kyuubi sighed in response. She and Naruto had more in common than either of them realized. He swore he would have mistaken them for mother and son if he hadn't known any better. He sighed once more before standing up and turning to see Yugito enter for lessons today. He sighed. Rayne would have to wait because Nibi wasn't in the mood to teach her right now. Rayne walked out of the room, tears streaming down her cheeks, and began to quicken her pace as she approached the main doors. She noticed Itachi but paid no attention to him as she rushed out of the room, leaving a very confused Itachi with a plate full of cooked fish in hand. Okay. That was strange. As soon as he said that, Naruto dashed down the stairs and out the doors, oblivious to Itachi's confused expression. Itachi shook his head as he walked up the stairs to deliver the food Nibi had requested. What the hell is going on? First it was Rayne, and now it's Naruto. What exactly is going on? I'm not sure I even want to know. Naruto was hot on Rayne's tail because he had a bad feeling about his mother figure. They had grown close over the 5 years and could sometimes feel each other's emotions if they were strong enough. And right now, he could tell his mother was depressed, but he had no idea why. So he was going to find out, even if it meant chasing her down, which he knew would be impossible if she was traveling at full speed. Rayne bit her lower lip, aware that Naruto was following her. She considered stopping and telling him to return home, but then she would have to speak to him, and he could sense her state right now and would hound her until she spilled what was bothering her. She wished she could, but doing so would imply that his mother was still alive and wished to be with him. She was self-centered. She wanted him to think of her as his mother, but she knew that wasn't the case. Nonetheless, she wished to see him happy. That broke her heart because she knew he would choose Akira over her. She closed her eyes and began to slow down. It was the right thing to do, even if she didn't want to. Naruto deserved to be informed. She was about to come to a halt when she smelled something she was all too familiar with. Blood from humans. And it was new. This wouldn't normally bother her because vampires needed to feed on humans every now and then, but the scent of it did. It resembled Naruto's, but it was unmistakably human. Her heart slowed as she realized who it belonged to. Akira. Rayne took off again, this time in the direction of the scent. She ran towards it with all her might, trying to figure out why she was here. She didn't have to once she got into the clearing. The dried stains on the massive, damaged origami bird were proof that she had been injured before arriving here. However, the new blood, as a turn chewed on her lower half, was coming from the severed half of her body. Worst of all, it was. Naruto had finally caught up. And he recognized her from Itachi's photographs. The turned had no idea what was about to happen. Otherwise, it would not have attacked the injured Akira. The entire clearing was enveloped in an oppressive green mist in an instant. Naruto's eyes bleed gold as he and his dark side merged for a brief moment. They were both so enraged that they set everything aside. As the intensity increased, the green mist began to turn goldish and purple, and the mist doubled in size, then tripled. As the dual half-breed began to physically change, the immense energy covered half of the forest. All of his hair began to grow longer as it covered his skin, which was turning gray with a slimy coating, just like it did in his vampiric form. 2 bulges appeared from the back of his shirt and began to rip through it, revealing the 2 bat-like wings, but this time they were different. The top of his wing was covered in blonde fur, while the rest remained as it had before his vampiric transformation. His face lengthened and grew as his teeth hardened and lengthened into fangs. His nose flattened and became more like that of a dog as his face lengthened and resembled that of a large wolf. His claws lengthened and sharpened to the point where they could easily shred through a wall of diamonds. As Naruto's legs morphed into more canine-like limbs, his kneecaps reversed themselves. His arms grew to match the length of his legs, while his chest expanded to accommodate his changing body. Where his tailbone was, a bulge appeared in the back of his pants. Then another, and then 2 more. Then there are 4. They slashed through, revealing 8 dog-like tails flailing wildly behind him. And his Yuki and Banpai Ryoku merged to nearly quadruple the amount of power he was emitting, nearly covering the entire island. And the eyes of the 7-foot-long, 4-foot-tall vampiric Inu were fixed on one thing. The flipped. It was messed up. All time had stopped within the mansion. The amount of energy released was incredible. Itachi had never experienced anything like it. He'd never seen Rayne of Kyuubi go all out before. He looked down at Nibi, whose eyes narrowed as she recognized some of Naruto's power in his vampiric form. But he couldn't transform at this point, could he? Where did the rest of it come from? She quickly shook her head and motioned for Itachi to investigate. He didn't need to be reminded more than once. Gobi was walking around the complex because she couldn't think of anything else to do when she felt the energy. Her eyes widened because she hasn't felt anything like it since her defeat at the hands of Kyuubi, though it isn't quite at his level. It also felt familiar. It felt similar to hers when she went all out, but with a hint of vampiric power. When Kyuubi felt it, he paused his fire control lesson with Yugito. Yugito was terrified because she had never felt anything so oppressive before and didn't want to experience it again. Kyuubi's pupils were constricted. It wasn't in his league, but it could give Hashimata a run for his money. And it wasn't its energy, so he was going to investigate. All he knew was that it felt like vampiric and demonic energy to him. This resulted in one conclusion. He collided with Itachi and Gobi as they ran past a terrified Yanbi, who was doing everything she could not to pass out from fear. They rushed out the door, forgetting to shut it, and headed to their destination, who happened to be someone they both cared about in different ways. Naruto. Rayne had rarely felt fear in her life, and it had been so long that she had forgotten what it felt like. But she was scared now. Not because of Naruto's power, as she was still more powerful. But look at his eyes. They weren't his normal carefree, loving eyes, nor were they his crazed form's golden eyes. These eyes appeared to be in excruciating pain, with unfathomable rage burning within them. Naruto trembled with rage as he stared at the turned, who had finally realized what was happening and was fleeing for its life. Naruto noticed this before letting out an earth-shattering roar and appearing in front of the turned with what appeared to be stop time. Naruto growled angrily before flashing by it several times. As blood splattered on the ground and Naruto, both arms and legs split into dozens of pieces. Naruto savagely glared at it as its torso landed on the ground. He jumped its torso and began slashing through its hardened skin as if it were tissue. The turned screamed in agony as Naruto slashed it until its insides were exposed. Naruto came to a halt when he saw the flesh of what it had devoured from his mother. His rage multiplied as he focused on the turned, who was barely alive. He grabbed the creature's skull and looked at it pityingly. He ripped the top of his head off with a quick jerk of his wrist, leaving only the lower jaw. A geyser of blood erupted from the turned, drenching Naruto. He didn't care as he approached his mother and nuzzled her lifeless form. Akira opened her eyes with the last of her strength and looked at the strange creature in front of her. But she wasn't scared. Even with all of the power it was emitting, it felt comforting to her. She couldn't explain how she knew this creature was Naruto because she could see him in its eyes. As she struggled to lift her arm to its muzzle, she smiled lightly. "En Naru." She coughed violently, spitting blood all over Naruto. He shook his head as he looked down at her. He was afraid that his mother, who had given birth to him, would die. Akira gave him a soft smile, blood dripping from her lips. "Naruto. I'm terribly sorry. IW wasn't. T wasn't there for you. P thank you. F forgive me." Naruto still trembled as he looked down at her. He tried to speak, but only managed a light growl. Realizing he couldn't talk in this form, he nuzzled her cheek instead. Akira nuzzled back against her transformed son, smiling as tears streamed down her cheeks. Thank you, my son. She willingly closed her eyes and let the darkness consume her. Her son did not dislike her for not being present. Knowing that, she could die in peace. Her hand slipped from his face as her torso sagged. Naruto's canine eyes widen in alarm as he notices this and begins nuzzling against her, unsure what to do. After a few dozen failed attempts, Naruto's panic began to subside. Tears streamed from his eyes and landed on Akira's pale face. He collapsed against what was left of her body and let out a bone-chilling howl. Every negative emotion except anger, hatred, or anything along those lines was present. Rayne closed her eyes, determined not to run to him. He requires this alone time. She was about to turn and walk away when Gobi, Itachi, and Kyuubi appeared, all shaken up. Rayne simply tilted her head behind her to signal them to look. Itachi was the first to notice what was happening when he recognized Akira. But, Sensei. Fill in the blanks, Kyuubi. I'm going to go find Jiraiya. Return Naruto to the mansion once he has calmed down. Let him weep until then. Rayne's heavy response. The kitsune nodded as Rayne walked past him, not looking back because her heart couldn't take it. She could hear Naruto's bone-chilling howls all night. 4 figures emerged from the rubble of a cratered landscape where a lush forest once stood as another figure approached them. It appears you all made it. In response, the auburn-haired man, an enraged Uchiha, a fish-like humanoid, and a plant-like man nodded. They were all terrible looking. Then again, they managed to survive an explosion comparable to an atomic bomb, so it's a miracle they're still alive. Madara, the smallest of the 4, appeared relatively unharmed. Aside from his cloak being slightly burned, he appeared to be unharmed. Fugoku was missing 2 fingers on his right hand, his left thumb, and had severe lacerations all over his body that were causing him to bleed profusely. He wouldn't be among the living if he wasn't healed soon. Kisame had gashes all over his body, but he appeared to be unharmed. He was, however, holding Samahata's snapped form in his arms. Zetsu appeared to be unharmed, but the fact that he wasn't covered in his Venus flytrap and was missing his right arm indicated that he had been injured. Pain was about the same size as Zetsu, but his body was covered in cuts and bruises, as well as heavy bleeding from his missing right eye. Madara surveyed his subordinates before sighing mentally. They were in no condition to act. And it's unlikely to happen anytime soon. I want you 3 to get well. Once you're here, we'll need to find new recruits to fill the gaps. For the time being, I'll be working on that. Pain already has a list, so let him know when you're ready. Wearing cloaks is a dead giveaway as to who we are. The hunt for the Biju is now over. We do not have the necessary strength. Now go. They didn't need to be told twice. As Zetsu merged with the ground and followed them, Pain grabbed Fugoku and shushined him. Kisame walked away, more concerned with his sword than with his own wounds. Madara shook his head and stood in the crater's center. He surveyed the devastation before reaching into his tattered cloak and pulling out a book that appeared to be a recent bingo book from Suna and inspecting it. He was looking for the ones Pain had identified as the best fit for future members. Akanami Rikamaru. Threat level S. Village. Nukanen from a Megacure. Bounty. 1,250,000 Ryo. Age. 17. Bloodline limit. Washigan. Information. Extreme affinity for water. Almost unprecedented skill in sniping. One of the best trap specialists in the elemental nations. Quite possibly the strongest shinobi ever to come out of the Akanami clan. summoner and contract holder of sea serpents. Was predicted to be the next Ryukage. Do not face in a long-range battle. Rumored to have joined forces with Kazekiri Ray. Reason for leaving, crime. Assassinated entire council and the Sandaime Ryukage. Said to be looking for his B-rank Nukenin sister, Akanami Makoto. Kazekiri Ray. Threat level: A to S. Village: Nukenin from Iwagakure. Bounty: 250,000, dead, 1 million, alive. Age: 14. Bloodline limit: ability to control the ground at will. Information: excels in ninjutsu and taijutsu. Has an extreme affinity for earth and moderate affinity for wind and water. Daughter of the late Sandaime Tsuchikage. Has trouble against genjutsu. Summoner of golems. IQ: 192. Rumored to be telepathic. Fighting in close range is undesirable. Rumored to have joined forces with Akanami Rikamaru. Reason for leaving, crime. Left due to civil war raging. Desires revenge for the murder of her father, S-rank Nukenin Kurbomu Deidara. Kuretsuchi Naraku. Threat level: S. Village: Nukenin from Kumo. Bounty: 1 million ryo. Age: 36. Bloodline limits: no limit. Information: highly skilled with ninjatus. Has an extreme affinity for lighting. Hasn't been seen in the last 8 years. Rumored to live in Nami no Kuni. Has 2 ninjatus that have abilities not unlike the Kiri Tenkan. One is said to reflect ninjutsu while the other is rumored to create a barrier. Fight with caution. Reason for leaving, crime. Killed over 100 people before betrayal. Around half were shinobi. Momochi Zabuza. Threat level: A to S. Village: Nukenin from Kirigakure. Bounty: 500,250 ryo. Age: 28. Bloodline limit: no limit. Information: highly skilled in silent assassination. Second strongest member of the last Kiri no Shinobigatana Shichinin Shu. Has an high affinity for water. Said to have an apprentice with the Hayaten bloodline. Rumored to have been seen along the border of Kaminari and Hai no Kuni. Nickname: Oni no Kiri. Said to have killed over 100 potential genin when he was a child. Avoid being near water in a confrontation. Reason for leaving, crime. Attempted assassination of the Sandaime Mizukage. Azuki Yugo. Threat level: A to S. Village: Nukenin from Konohagakure. Bounty: 450,000, alive, 425,700 ryo, dead. Age: 20. Bloodline limit: no limit. Information: excels in all shinobi aspects. Has a tendency to lean to kenjutsu. Said to have an affinity for all elements. Rumored to have been seen in Kiri no Kuni, near the Dead Sea. Fighting in close range in undesirable. Reason for leaving, crime. Seeks revenge on the murder of her boyfriend, fiancé copyright, Gekko Hayate, Uchiha Itachi. Madara smirked as he read the profiles. Pain does have a good eye for recruits. Time to have a little chat with these 5. In a swirl of black fire, Uchiha Madara left to seek out his new recruits. Jiraiya scribbled furiously in his book as he gazed into the onsen through his telescope from his perch in the tree. It didn't matter that it was sunset and he stood out like a sore thumb. He needed material for his new book and wasn't about to be denied. The council had halted his work because they demanded that he train the last Uchiha. At that thought, he shook his head and continued peeping while scribbling. Like I'd train that brat anyway, it appears he's more obsessed with killing his father and finding his brother than staying in this village. Besides, the Gaki is still in the academy, and Naruto is a better learner than he ever was. Plus, he'd stifle my style, though I might be able to get some with him around because he'd attract all kinds of women. As he thought this, drool began to leak from the side of his mouth, completely ignoring the fact that his spit was leaking on his notebook and a person wearing a black hooded cloak was walking towards him with purpose and, above all, looking slightly pissed. He's peeping again. I'm embarrassed that he is descended from my sister. It's simply embarrassing. Standing in the shade next to the tree, Rayne brought her foot back and slammed it into the tree, snapping it like a twig. Jiraiya blinked a few times before his eyes widened and he screamed like a girl as he collided with the ground in the tree on top of him. Rayne just stared at him as he struggled with the large tree on top of him, knowing he was faking it because he was capable of much more. As she approached the struggling pervert, she flicked her wrist and one of her blades appeared. The said pervert's eyes widen as he recognizes the blade and easily pushes the tree off, jumping up unharmed before turning to her. So, Rayne, what brings you here? And have you been traveling during the day? Taking a closer look at her, he noticed light burn marks on her skin and clothes, indicating that she had been traveling all day. Yes, because this is significant enough. I need you to return with me and repair the Ichibi container's seal so he doesn't go insane and try to kill everyone. Jiraiya nodded, expecting something similar to happen when they recovered one of the Jinchuriki. I see. Okay, just give me a few minutes to go to the council and inform them that I'll be leaving. He turned around and was about to walk away when he noticed Rayne's grim expression and turned his head back around. How's the Gaki doing? Rayne flinched at his question, causing Jiraiya to turn around completely. He had never seen Rayne flinch for any reason. So he was aware that something bad had occurred. He took in more of her appearance and noticed that she was slightly depressed, her eyes were watering, and she was shivering. He became even more concerned as he observed all of this. Shit. What exactly happened to the Gaki? Don't tell me he transformed yet again and went on a killing spree. She took a deep breath and looked up at Jiraiya. I'll tell you after you speak with the council. It's best if you don't find out until after you leave. Jiraiya looked at her for a few moments before nodding slowly, seeing the seriousness mixed in with all the other emotions on her face. Okay, I'll meet you a few miles outside of town, but I'd like to know everything that happened. Rayne nodded in agreement before fading from view, leaving Jiraiya perplexed as he turned towards the former Hokage's owner. As they renamed it, he scoffed at the idea of calling it the council's tower. Those old fools just keep making the same mistakes. If it hadn't been for my devotion to the village, I would have left it with Orochimaru and Tsunade. Shaking that thought off, he jumped from roof to roof towards the aforementioned tower, wondering what could have happened to Naruto to make Rayne so concerned. Itachi sat alone in a dark room, his Sharingan sagging slightly. He was taken aback to discover that his sensei had been alive the entire time and he had been unaware of it. But that wasn't what was bothering him at the moment. It was the fact that Rayne had apparently known this and had kept it a secret until she died near the mansion. And it hurt. He could understand not telling Naruto because he might have rushed off to find her. He could also understand it from her perspective, as she considered herself his mother, even if it was selfish. But why not inform him or Kyuubi of this? He couldn't understand it. She acted as if she didn't believe them. He sat in the dark thinking about what had happened while staring at the same spot on the floor when he had an epiphany. Was she worried that one of us would tell Naruto? If that's the case, I suppose I can understand. She should have trusted us more, though. I wouldn't have told him if she had been our spy in Akatsuki all along. Itachi sighed, continuing to stare at the floor for no apparent reason as his Sharingan faded back to its normal onyx color. He couldn't decide what to think anymore. He was so engrossed in his thoughts that he didn't notice the door opening. Nibi blinked as she adjusted her eyes to the darkness and noticed the Kitsune Hanyu sitting on his bed, staring at a spot on the floor. She had no idea why she came except to repay him for being a nice prick. When a kunai whizzed by her face, she limped over to him, trying to figure out what to do. She blinked in surprise, having not even noticed him move. "Not right now. You'll get your payback later." Itachi simply replied, continuing to stare at the floor as if it held his answers. The Nekomata blinked even more in response to this. It was as if he expected her to get back at him, which irritated her to no end. Her ability to be unpredictable was something she took pride in. As he continued to stare at the ground, she growled at him. "What is your issue, half-breed? You mocked me when I was down. I have the same right." Itachi slowly lifted his head and glared at her, activating his Sharingan and advancing it to the Mangekyo in response. Nibi's eyes widened for a split second before narrowing. What the hell is going on with him? Can he handle it if someone else annoys him, but it's fine if he does it? She gave him another look before growling. "What the hell is the matter with you? You think you can go around screwing people and not get anything in return?" Itachi growled at her, refusing to deal with this right now. "Please don't push me. I haven't slept since 2 days ago. Naruto is currently unconscious as a result of releasing so much power, learning that my sensei, a woman I considered a mother, was alive the entire time and that she was Naruto's mother, and she died right in front of our eyes." Hearing this, Nibi's head shot up. She hadn't been told what had happened yet, primarily because she was still injured and didn't need anything else placed on her. She gave Itachi a surprised look before speaking briefly. "That must have been him." Itachi nodded before deactivating his Mangekyo Sharingan and returning his gaze to the ground. She didn't know why, but she felt sorry for both Naruto and him. Her sister was kidnapped and killed 10 years ago, so she knew what it was like to lose family. She had no idea what had happened, but she blamed Kyuubi for not being present for her. She had no idea she was wrong until recently. Flashback. Nibi glared at Kyuubi, who had just finished telling her what had happened with Akatsuki and the dangers of leaving the mansion without someone to fight her. Kyuubi shrank back slightly in the face of the Nekomata's glare, knowing what it was for. He swallowed some spit before taking a deep breath and was about to speak when she interrupted him. "How on earth could you?" He mentally flinched at her angry, hateful, and hurtful tone of voice. Kyuubi sighed again as he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes to hide the tears that were welling up in his eyes. "It isn't what you think it is." She growled deeply as she clawed the table in front of him, glaring viciously at him. "Would you mind explaining why my Imouto, your fiancé copyright, is no longer with us?" Kyuubi closed his eyes tighter, vowing not to go on a destructive rampage as he recalled the events that led to her untimely death. She was 6 months pregnant and due any day because she had been overdue for nearly a month. We were out of food, so I went out to find some because she was in no condition to go. Nibi kept staring at Kyuubi as he spoke, but she had stopped clawing at the table as she sat back down and awaited the rest of his story. When I returned to the den, there were signs of struggle and someone being dragged away. I ran inside and couldn't find her anywhere, but her blood was all over the floor. Enraged, I transformed and dashed out to find her and kill her assailants, but all I found was Akatsuki's figurehead, the man known as Pain. I attempted to kill him, but he turned out to be an astral projection. I tried to smell Tenshi, but I couldn't. It was as if it had vanished. After a few more attempts at killing his astral projection in order to find out where they were keeping her, he orders me to attack Konoha in order to see her again. So I did, nearly razing the village to get her back. But I underestimated the power of one man, who happens to be Naruto's father. I am the Yondaime Hokage. During my rampage, he sealed me into his own son. I tried to escape and continue my destruction so I could see her again, but by the third day, I could feel her and our children's life forces fading. I tried to escape in order to save her, but it was futile. So, after a few more days, I fell asleep, no longer wanting to live. Kyuubi had kept his eyes closed the entire time he told the story to Nibi in order to keep from crying. He didn't go on to explain his life inside Naruto because she probably already knew what it was like. Nibi, on the other hand, was clawing at the table once more, but this time her rage wasn't directed at him. So the same thugs who took her away want our power. He nodded lightly and kept his eyes closed for a few more seconds before slowly opening them to reveal Nibi's golden yellow eyes, which were filled with rage and determination. Then I'll stay here on one condition. That I'll be able to exact my vengeance on those cretins. Kyuubi closed his eyes and gave her a slight nod. Fine. You can, but you must first consult with Rayne. Nibi nodded, stood up, and marched out of the room, intent on finding a specific dhampir. End of flashback.
She sighed slightly as she looked at the Uchiha in front of her, understanding his anguish all too well.
And, according to Naruto, he had been disowned by his own family, with the exception of his Otudo, before betraying the village for the sake of Naruto. Then, while he was away, his father murdered his entire family, including his Otudo, in cold blood. He disliked his family, not his clan, according to what she had learned, so it was a difficult blow for him to bear. She sighed slightly as she sat beside him on the bed, looking up at the ceiling. She understood that everyone had their own way of dealing with things, and this was his, so she shouldn't get involved. But she knew that having someone else help you through the difficult times was always preferable. Even if she didn't know how or why, she was going to do it because the pain of losing Imouto all those years ago was still fresh in her mind. The two sat on the bed all night, staring at the floor and ceiling, respectively. Rayne sighed deeply as she leaned against a tree, waiting for Jiraiya. She honestly didn't know what to say to him. Sure, he'd figure it out eventually with his spy network and contact with Akira, but she didn't want him to find out that way. After all, even if she wished he wasn't, he was still family. She closed her eyes and listened to the wind, the tree branches and leaves, and the grass. She tried to distract herself by listening to the owls and other nocturnal animals. She was at a loss for what to do. Everything had gone so wrong in such a short period of time. She shook her head and closed her eyes as she listened to a toad croak. Her brows twitched slightly as a large armored toad leapt in front of her, Jiraiya on top of him, looking like the idiot he was. Rayne simply stared at him as he jumped off Gamma, returning to his world. Shaking that thought away, she noticed Jiraiya's face become solemn as he spoke. Alright. I told the council I found a lead on Orochimaru and was going to check it out. What happened now? Rayne mentally flinched because she wasn't quite ready to tell him, but she knew she had to. Jiraiya. These last few nights have been incredibly exciting. It all started with the Akatsuki movements you mentioned. We managed to stop them and inform them that Naruto was no longer the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. But Itachi, Kyuubi, and I forgot it was a full moon during the process, and Naruto transformed. Hearing this, Jiraiya cursed both mentally and vocally. He recalled the first time he witnessed the transformation. He was fortunate that it was in the mansion, and both Rayne and Kyuubi responded quickly, as he was struggling to keep up, even in sage mode. Rayne continued on after he finished reminiscing. Fortunately, I arrived before any damage could be done, but at the expense of Nibi's strength. She will never be able to physically fight at the same level again. He managed to regain control of himself before passing out when I arrived. When we got home that night, I told Kyuubi to keep an eye on the Ichibi vessel. And that Naruto's mother was still alive. Jiraiya's brow furrowed, but he continued to listen because he was relieved to hear Naruto regain control of himself. Maybe I should look into his mind later and see if we can find and fix the source of his problem. After I finish with the Suna kid, I'll have to talk to the Gaki. On my way to find you, Naruto followed me because he sensed I was upset. I was about to tell him to go back when I noticed a scent similar to his, but slightly different. I quickly followed it and came across a nearly dead Akira. Jiraiya paled when he heard this and was mentally cursing herself for disobeying him and going to find Naruto anyway. Unless the older wounds I saw on her appeared to be shinobi wounds, indicating she had been discovered. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow, perplexed, as he heard older wounds. He assumed she had been found, but she had newer ones on her. His eyes widened in realization as he realized how dangerous that forest was. When she entered the forest, probably to rest, she had no idea how dangerous it was, and Rayne couldn't finish because she saw Jiraiya clench his fist and control his emotions in order to avoid exploding. And she was certain he would if he found out how she found her. But, to make matters worse, Naruto was still hot on my tail when I found her. Jiraiya's face fell when he heard this. He understood what that meant. It meant Naruto had recognized her. He spoke softly after taking a deep breath in sorrow for his deceased student and what had happened to his grandson. And what happened after that? Rayne closed her eyes and took a deep breath before responding to the normally upbeat super pervert. For lack of a better phrase, he was transformed. But not into a full-blown vampire or demon, but into both. Somehow, his demonic and vampiric blood stopped fighting each other and joined forces to transform him into something I'd never seen before with the power of Hashimoto. He stayed by his mother's side and wept all night after he brutally murdered the Turned. He should be at the mansion right now. Jiraiya looked down and nodded slightly. He spoke after a few minutes of eerie silence. You know you're going to have to talk to him, or else he'll never forgive you for hiding this from him. She responded with a slow nod. I know. I'm at a loss for words. Jiraiya sighed and was about to say something when he noticed Rayne had jumped up in the tree in front of him, nodding in understanding because he wouldn't know what to do in her shoes. Come on, pervert, we need to get moving or Kyuubi will be pissed at me for leaving him alone for so long with a psychotic Jinchuriki that he's not allowed to kill. Jiraiya shook his head, then jumped up and followed Rayne to the island. As she leaned against the wall, Gobi sighed lightly.
Her face didn't show it, but she was concerned about the blonde-haired boy in the bed.
She was well aware of the psychological harm that could be done to a child's mind. Naruto may deny being a child because he had mentally matured over the years as a result of his training and life in Konoha, but he was still a child at heart. Even if they were a child, they should not have to witness the brutal murder of their own family in front of them. She sighed lightly before holding back a growl as Yugito dragged an unwilling Yanbi towards Naruto's room. Gobi could care less about Yanbi because she didn't want to be there, but this Nekomata Hanyu was irritating her. Could she not see that he belonged only to her? Yugito ignored Gobi's slightly irritated expression as she entered the room to check on Naruto. Yanbi, of course, did not, and she became even more terrified than before. She didn't mind the Nekomata Hanyu for some reason, but being in a room with Gobi and the boy who felt frightening was really pushing her limits. Gobi huffed angrily and turned away from the two, as if she didn't care, which was far from the case. She stared at the wall for a few moments as Yugito checked on Naruto before leaving the room with a grateful Yanbi, who seemed to have overcome her fear of Naruto after Yugito talked about him. Gobi shook her head and returned her gaze to Naruto before returning her gaze to the wall, pondering what was going to happen. There were numerous possibilities when he awoke. Damn it. This will not be an easy task. I hope he doesn't try to isolate himself from everyone or flee. I know Rayne is afraid he'll abandon her, and with him at odds with himself, that's a reasonable fear. However, he could also attempt suicide or seppuku. Damn you, dhampir. She has a knack for leaving things in disarray. I'll give her that, whether it's physically or in a situation. She sighed again as she stared at the wall in front of her, unsure what to do. She closed her eyes and let her ears take over. Nothing was happening other than the Neko Hanyu trying to get Yanbi to speak. After a few minutes, she heard ruffling in the bed and turned around to see Naruto roll over and begin to push himself up. Gobi approached him to gauge his reaction and see what he was going to do. She noticed that he hadn't even noticed her yet, which was odd given that he had looked in her direction when he awoke. Naruto sat up in his bed and looked around the hazy room before staring blankly at the wall. Despite the fact that it was not vacant to him, all he could see were images of Akira, his mother, and her tragic death. He lowered his gaze from the wall, but he couldn't get her image out of his mind. Regardless of what he tried, rubbing, blinking, and even closing their eyes did not help. He raised his fingers and scratched them, hoping to remove the images. He was attempting to do so when he felt his wrist being gripped by two strong, yet feminine hands. When he opened his eyes, he saw Gobi gripping his wrist, worried and confused on her face. He blinked a few times before the memories of last night began to flood back in. It wasn't a dream, he thought as he gazed down at the bed. He closed his eyes and began to cry as he remembered the look on her face before passing on to the next dimension. He couldn't hold back the tears that streamed down his cheeks and onto the bed and his thighs. Gobi blinked, surprised because she hadn't expected this reaction. She hadn't anticipated him crying right away. She was expecting that later on, after he had vented some of his rage on Rayne or someone else, possibly the pervert she had met briefly. She shook her head and looked down at Naruto, trying to figure out what to do. She had no idea what to do, but she let go of his wrist and wrapped her hands around his shoulders instinctively. Naruto flinched slightly in surprise as she comfortably grasped him. He couldn't help but bury his head into her shoulder as he sobbed even harder, letting go of all his emotions as she offered him a shoulder to cry on, even though that wasn't what he truly buried himself into. Gobi tried hard not to blush, but her cheek tinged as he cried into her breast. Normally, she would have hit him for being so close to them, but it didn't matter at this point. She just let him cry while wrapping him tightly, unable to let him go. After 2 hours, Naruto was feeding on a cow in front of the mansion that Kyuubi had brought, knowing Naruto would need to feed and vent his rage on something. Gobi had left his room after he had finished crying, muttering something he couldn't understand, but he was glad she was there for him. Shaking it off, he bit down harder on the struggling cow as it tried to break free, but it wasn't to be as he continued to feed on it. After a few minutes, he had had enough and yanked the dying cow off, shaking his head. At the very least, we'll be able to make steak out of it. He turned around, shrugged, and was about to go inside when he noticed two familiar scents approaching the mansion. His eyes narrowed as he smelled Rayne, and he would have walked away to ignore her if he hadn't recognized the second to be Jiraiya, the seal's master. He grumbled a little and was about to walk away when he ran into Kyuubi, who raised an eyebrow. "Please move. I don't want to speak with her." Kyuubi raised his brow even higher at this. "What gives you the impression that I'm giving you a choice? You and I will talk as much as you need while I take the pervert to fix the knocked-out Suna kid." Naruto shook his head and sweated slightly as he heard this. "Didn't you knock him out again?" Jiraiya and Rayne had arrived to see the dead cow, and the fox demon could only nod in response. Naruto's gaze froze on Rayne, causing Kyuubi and Jiraiya to sigh. Come with me, pervert. I'll take you to the kid who needs his seal repaired. Jiraiya nodded, slightly annoyed because he wasn't just a pervert, but a super pervert. He shook it off and was about to follow him when Naruto interrupted. I need to see you after you're finished Arrow Sennin because no one else here has any decent sealing knowledge. Everyone was surprised, and Kyuubi was about to say something when Rayne shot him a glare and shook her head, forcing him to shut up and take Jiraiya inside. Naruto continued to stare at Rayne, waiting for her to say something. Rayne sighed as she realized this and was still unsure what to do. And because she was the oldest being in existence, it was difficult to find someone who could assist you. Shaking that thought away, she looked at Naruto before moving her gaze to his feet, not wanting to meet his gaze. Naruto. She took a deep breath to calm herself down as Naruto tapped his foot, waiting for her to continue. Naruto. I apologize for keeping this from you. Until last night, it was for the best for both of you. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he heard this. His rage increased as he suppressed his Yuki and Banpai Ryoku and growled at her. All for the best. My mother is dying for the best. How could you have missed this? Did you not think it was important enough for me to bring it up? Rayne flinched at each of his words, which were more powerful than any blow she had ever received. She looked up from him, shivering slightly, and spoke quietly. I know this sounds selfish, but I didn't want you running to her. I knew you would, even if it meant risking your life to get to her. I didn't want to see you suffer because I consider you my own child. This paused Naruto for a moment as the words sunk in and calmed him down, but his anger quickly returned as his dark side began whispering to him. Naruto growled as he glared at the red-haired dhampir and prepared to flee into the forest. Is that correct? So why don't you tell the others? None of them were aware of any of this. And, of course, I would have approached her. She's my mother, and I know she'd never hurt me. It was obvious from her expression last night. This made her face fall. She was aware that it was true, but she couldn't let him flee now. She appeared behind him and slid him into the master lock. Naruto growled angrily at her as he struggled to break free. Please let me go. No, you must hear this. Rayne replied, easily restraining his struggling form. He growled a little more, but he knew he wouldn't get anywhere and had no choice but to listen to her. You couldn't possibly have run to her. You understand why. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her as he stopped struggling against her grip, wondering why he couldn't. Rayne let him go, causing him to fall to the ground. She responded as he stood up and dusted himself off. Because she was a member of Akatsuki. Hearing this, the blood in his veins began to cool. His mother could not have been a member of the organization that sought global dominance. She was too nice for that, even if he had only known her for a few moments. No. Rayne sighed, shaking her head and sighing sadly. Yes, she was. She was dressed in a black cloak with red clouds on it, in case you didn't notice. But, as one of our spies, she was on our side. Naruto, she joined to protect you. She loved you so much that she gave up her presence with you just so you could be safe. She gave up her title of mother to me because she would rather you live your life in peace than on the run. Naruto looked up at her and instinctively sniffed the air to see if she was telling the truth before letting it all sink in. She sacrificed everything for him. Not only that, but she gave up her life to save him from the Akatsuki, despite the fact that he was no longer Kyuubi's vessel. For the second time that day, he fell to his knees as tears streamed down his cheeks. Rayne rushed over to him, encircling him in a tight embrace and gently rubbing his back. It's fine, Naruto. Simply let it go. And for the second time that day, Naruto couldn't take it any longer and buried himself into another woman's breast, sobbing as they tried to comfort him. A woman with blue hair and a man with sunshine blonde hair smiled lightly from high above, where no human, demon, or vampire could see.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.